I don't know what happened. I wasn't involved. I would not have done that. I was very angry with John McCain because he killed health care. I was not a big fan of John McCain in any way, shape, or form. Now, somebody did it because they thought I didn't like him, okay? And they were well-meaning, I will say. I didn't know anything about it. I would never have done that.
I just can't. He's dead.
I'll rephrase that for the president, okay? It's terrible what they did. The ship should be there. They should take down the tarp.
He didn't say
I'm proud to stand in front of that ship. That's what he should have said. Instead, it was like he was a cornered school kid by a teacher. It was such a weird thing for a president to do.
Well, this is just a nitpick, but Thad Cochran, the great late senator from Mississippi, died today. Trump tweets about it. He has to throw in, he was very, very sick, but he made it for a key vote on health care, which was yet another obvious.
Showing that death doesn't for you. Let me explain the story for anyone that missed it. That he was referring to there was reporting that the White House wanted the U.S. Navy to move a warship. The warship was called the USS John McCain, out of sight for the president's visit to Japan. This is according to emails between the military and White House officials that the Journal saw. They reported this, quote, a tarp was hung over the ship's name ahead of the president's trip. It's according to photos reviewed by the Journal, and sailors were directed to remove any coverings from the ship that bore its name. After the tarp was taken down, a barge was moved closer to the ship, obscuring its name. Sailors on the ship, who typically wear caps bearing its name, were given the day off during Mr. Trump's visit, people familiar with the matter said. The Navy asserts all ships remained in normal configuration. An acting Defense Secretary, Pat Shanahan, told reporters this morning, quote, I never authorized, I never approved any action around the movement or activity regarding that ship. Furthermore, I would never dishonor the memory of a great American patriot like Senator McCain. Okay, so here's the problem. Dishonor starts at the top. And the dishonorable posture that the entire administration has toward John McCain, an American hero, has seeped in somewhere. Mark Salter, a longtime aide to John McCain, tweeted last night that they should haul people basically up before Congress until they figure out where this happened.
Exactly. Somebody believed, if he has plausible deniability and he says he didn't know, the president, if somebody believed that they had to do this, they believed that because of everything the president has ever said or done to dishonor John McCain. And what his daughter said today just really, really got to me, and I hadn't even thought about it, that basically this third world, like Banana Republic thing where you would cover a name with a tarp, you know, because the leader's coming and you don't want him to get upset or whatever. It's basically intimidating everyone in the military from honoring John McCain. And they know that they shouldn't talk about him and revere him and spotlight him because that's coming from the top down, from the commander-in-chief. And that is just awful.
Oh my God, they should rename Pennsylvania. I think someone wrote this on Twitter. They should rename Pennsylvania Avenue so he has to drive down John McCain Avenue every day. I mean, the idea, though, that any of this gets normalized to the point where Donald Trump describes the person who did this as well-meaning. Well-meaning for what? Well-meaning my fragile ego? Well-meaning? Yes. What does that mean?
Yeah, well-meaning and also loyal to the president and what he wants and loves. If there's one thing we know about President Trump, it's that he loves physical details. The way that he called Kirstjen Nielsen about the matte black paint for the border wall or the circular top of the border wall instead of it being spiked. The way, if I remember correctly, it was reported that he was poring over binders of like different drapes and drapery and fixings for the Oval Office when he was elected. He loves the
What else is he going to do, though, Alexei?
What?
I mean, you report on his schedules. You know, he doesn't have a lot going on, right? No. I mean, we know he's not busy.
Lots of executive time to look at these things, and that suggests to me, I don't know if the president knew about this. He says he doesn't, right. But that suggests to me that he is someone who is very clearly, and we all know this, aware of and concerned with the optics around him, and he wants it to be very precise, and he wants it to be focused on him. He didn't want to have John McCain's name in the background as a distraction from his visit and his presence and what he was saying and doing. there is no secret or no surprise in the fact that he certainly would have had something to do with this or to know about this.
Or that the people, and I don't even know what's worse. He said he didn't know about it. I'm not sure that it isn't worse that the people around him knew how fragile he was, that if he saw it, he'd lose it.
I'm so disturbed by the idea that political operatives were successful in manipulating the military in this way, too, because the military and all of the dealings that I had with them during the Bush administration in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I know that you too at the White House, I was always so impressed how they kept it operational and were so apolitical, and they were very firm on that. We were, trying to stay within the confines and be appropriate too. But you look at how institutions that have revered such a virtue, it's now off the rails.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.